and his black and white cat. Early in the morning, just as day is dawning, he picks up all the post bags in his van. Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. All the birds are singing, and the day is just beginning. Pat feels he's a really happy man. Everybody knows his bright red van. All his friends will smile as he waves to greet them. Maybe you can never be sure there'll be knock, ring, letters through your door. Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. All the birds are singing, and the day is just beginning. Pat feels he's a really happy man. Everybody knows his bright red van. All his friends will smile as he waves to May. Ring letters through your door. Let Postman Pat and his black and white cat. Early in the day is dawning, he picks up all the post bags in his van. Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. All the birds are singing, and the day is just beginning. Pat feels he's a really happy man. Postman Pat on the run. "Now then," said Pat one Thursday morning, "has my new uniform come yet?" Pat had had his old uniform for a long, long time, and it was very shabby. He had ordered a new one, and he'd been waiting weeks and weeks for it to come. "No, it hasn't," said Mrs. Goggins, looking at the label on a parcel. "But there are some new people for you at Lane Head. They're Mr. and Mrs. Bagnall, and they have a lot of letters and a large parcel." "Oh," said Pat, "I'll have to carry that parcel half a mile. The road stops long before it gets to Lane Head. They must have had a right time moving in, carrying the tables and beds and chairs and everything up there. I hope that parcel isn't too heavy." "Oh, it's not too bad," said Mrs. Goggins. Lane Head was near the end of Pat's round, so his bag was almost empty when he got there. It only had the post for Mr. and Mrs. Bagnall in it. He left the van at the end of the road, leaving Jess asleep in his basket. Then he set out to walk the rest of the way. As he climbed up the hilly field towards the house, he saw some white creatures in the far corner. He didn't take any notice of them until he was in the middle of the field, far away from any fence. Then he saw that the creatures were goats, and they were not tied up the way goats usually are. They came running to Pat. "Hello then, Billy," said Pat to the first one. "What friendly animals they are," he thought. Then he saw the billy goat put its head down so that its sharp horns pointed at him. It stamped its feet, then ran at Pat. "Help!" Pat shouted. "Help!" Pat ran as fast as he could, with his bag swinging and banging on his legs and getting in his way. He ran for the fence, but before he got to it, he felt the goat butting him from behind. "Ow! Ow! Help!" Pat yelled. Then he was at the fence. He jumped over, but caught his trousers on the barbed wire and ripped a big hole in them. What a mess he was in. When he reached the cottage, Mrs. Bagenal came to the door with a smile and a, "Good morning, postman." Her smile soon disappeared when she saw his torn trousers, and he told her how it happened. "Oh, my goodness, I'm sorry that happened," said Mrs. Bagenal. "But you see, they aren't our goats at all. We're new here, and they've chased us too. We go the long way round now." "Well, I haven't time to go the long way round," said Pat, "so I'll have to see if I can cure them of chasing people." "You can't go home like that," said Mrs. Bagenal. "Let's see if we can patch you up." She took him inside and found a tin of safety pins in a drawer. "Here we are now. We can patch you up with these." She pinned Pat's trousers together with safety pins all down the leg. "Now you're not going back through that field, are you?" she said, when Pat had given her the parcel and letters. "Oh, don't you worry," said Pat. "I have an idea for teaching that billy goat a lesson." Pat walked to the middle of the field. He held his empty bag open and waited for the goat to charge at him. "Come on, Billy. Come on, I'm ready for you this time," Pat said to the goat. The goat put its head down, pointed its horns at Pat, and charged. Pat stood still, holding the bag open. When it was almost touching him, he quickly popped the bag over its head and pushed it down over its horns. The goat shook its head from side to side. It was puzzled. Why had everything gone dark and stuffy? Why couldn't it see anything? It bleated sadly. It shook and shook its head, but it could not shake the bag off. It tried to walk away from Pat, but it walked in a circle and fell over its own legs. Oh dear, it was in a muddle. "Well now, have you learned your lesson?" said Pat. "Can I have my bag back yet?" He pulled the bag off. The goat shook itself and glared at Pat. It lowered its head and charged again. "Look out, Pat!" But Pat was ready for it. He popped the bag over its head again. This time he left it on longer. The goat was getting quite dizzy, trying to shake it off. Pat took the bag off. All the time, the nanny goat was quietly eating the grass some distance away. She took no part in the game at all. The billy goat looked dizzily at Pat, but all the same it lowered its head and charged again. "3 times for luck," said Pat, popping the bag over its head. He was getting very good at this, and the goat was getting worse and worse. Pat left the bag on a good long time until the goat was so muddled that it had to sit down. He took the bag off. The goat gave him a wobbly look. It got unsteadily to its feet and walked away. It stood with its back to Pat, pretending he wasn't there. Pat walked away, watching the goat all the time. It took no notice of him. It nibbled at the grass, and Pat walked back to his van. "You missed a good show," said Pat to Jess. Pat, the famous goat fighter. Jess had been dreaming about rabbits. He didn't think he'd missed anything. Pat called at the post office. He told Mrs. Goggins about the goats, and he showed her his torn trousers. "You're in luck," said Mrs. Goggins, "because your new uniform came after you left this morning." "My goodness, that is lucky," said Pat. "If it had come yesterday, I'd have had it on today, and it would have been torn instead of the old one." Pat took his new uniform home in its parcel and tried it on. It looked very smart, so the day ended happily after all. "I hope there's no post for Mr. and Mrs. Bagenal tomorrow," said Pat. "But I think I'll take a spare empty bag with me, just in case I need it." Pat bakes a cake. Sarah and Julian were going off to Wooler for a week to see Gran. There was a school holiday, and the weather wasn't too bad now, so it was a good time to go. Besides, they hadn't seen Gran for months and months. Pat saw them off at Pencaster Station very early in the morning. Sarah had left all kinds of nice things in the fridge for Pat's dinners. But Pat thought to himself, I'll have a nice surprise ready for when they come back. Later that day, when he'd finished delivering the post, Pat went to the village post office. This time, he went to the grocery part of the counter. He bought some flour, margarine, sugar, eggs, icing sugar, cherries, and dried fruit. Said Mrs. Goggins, it sounds as though your Sarah's making a cake. Oh, no, said Pat. They've gone to Wooler for the week. I'm making a cake. It's to be a surprise for when they come back. Do you often bake cakes, Pat? No, I've never made one before, said Pat, but I've got a good book from the mobile library that tells you how to do it. The book says it's easy. Pleased to work that evening. He set everything out on the kitchen table with the library book propped open at the page headed Fruit Cake, ready to begin. He read aloud from the book. 250 grams of flour. He noticed that there were two kinds of flour, plain and self-raising. Well, it's a plain cake, said Pat, so I'll use plain flour. He got the scales out and began to pour the flour into the bowl. He noticed that the dial on the scales was marked in ounces. It said not a word about grams. I wonder how many ounces there are in 250 grams. It sounds a lot to me. I'll just have to guess. He weighed out 25 ounces of flour and read from the book again. Place flour and salt in bowl and rub in the margarine. It was all in grams again, so he put a good dollop of margarine in the bowl and shook the salt cellar over it for a while. What's all this? Rub in the margarine? How on earth do you do that? He rubbed the piece of margarine about on the flour, but all it did was to puff flour up into his face. He simply buried the margarine in the flour in the end. Add sugar and fruit and beat the eggs and milk together. Mix everything together until it is soft. It was still in grams, so he had to guess how much sugar and how much fruit to put in. Well, Sarah always seemed to guess when she made cakes, and hers were always delicious. He mixed it as well as he could, but it seemed very lumpy. Place in a 6-inch tin and bake in a moderate oven for 1¼ hours. He couldn't find a ruler to measure the tins, so he used the first one he found, which did look rather big. Then, "What is a moderate oven?" said Pat. He looked at the back of the book, he looked at the front of the book, he looked all through the book, but it didn't say anywhere what it meant by a moderate oven. So he lit the oven and twirled the knob round to number 7. 7 for luck, he said. It's my lucky number always. He popped the cake in the oven and closed the door. He looked at his watch. Now, if we go to watch television, Jess, the cake will be ready after the news. Jess settled down by the fire, and Pat settled down in his armchair. The fire was warm. Quite soon, Jess's eyes began to close. Quite soon, Jess was fast asleep. Pat watched a play on television. It was a boring play. Quite soon, Pat's eyes began to close. And quite soon, Pat was fast asleep. Pat had a dream. He was being attacked by a tiger in India. It was trying to eat his leg. He could feel its sharp claws pulling at him. Pat woke up with a jump. Jess was clawing at his trouser leg, and there was a smoky smell coming from the kitchen. Pat jumped up and ran to the kitchen. He opened the oven. Clouds of smoke came puffing out, and oh, what a smell! Pat turned the oven off. He put the big oven gloves on his hands and felt in the middle of the smoke for the cake. He found it. He brought it out and dropped it in the sink. When the smoke cleared, Pat saw a cindery mess in the bottom of the tin. It didn't look like a cake at all. When Pat tried to put it in the rubbish bin, he found the cake would not come out of the tin. He had to throw tin and cake and all away. "Never mind, Jess," said Pat. "We have a week before they come back. There's time to have another try." When Pat went again the next day to buy flour and sugar and raisins and cherries and eggs and dried fruit, Mrs. Goggins said, "Goodness me, Pat, are you making another cake?" "No," said Pat. "Well, yes, I am in a way. The first one went wrong and I'm having another try." "Well, better luck second time round," said Mrs. Goggins. When Pat called at Greendale Farm, Mrs. Pottage was busy making a cake. "What's all this about rub in the margarine?" said Pat. "It doesn't tell you how to do it in my book." "That's easy," said Mrs. Pottage. "Look, you just cut the margarine into small pieces and rub it between your fingers until it mixes with the flour." Pat watched Mrs. Pottage's fingers closely. "Now I see," he said, smiling. When Pat called on Dorothy Thompson, she was just putting the oven on. "What's all this bake in a moderate oven?" said Pat. It doesn't tell you in my cookery book." "Gas mark 4, said Dorothy. "They expect you to know that, of course." Pat made a note in the back of his diary. "Thanks," he said. "I wish I'd known that last night." When Pat called on Miss Hubbard, she was making homemade wine. She was weighing out fruit and sugar. "Do you know anything about these grams they have in the cookery book these days?" said Pat. "I stick to ounces," said Miss Hubbard. "I'll have no truck with these newfangled grams." "The trouble is," said Pat, "I'm trying to make a cake from a library book, and it's all in grams. I got in a proper muddle." "Cake?" said Miss Hubbard. "Library book? What a lot of rubbish. Look, here's my old mother's recipe book. Turn to page 20. There's a lovely recipe for fruit cake there. Copy that down and you won't go wrong." "Thanks," said Pat. He wrote it in the back of his diary. When Pat called in on Ted Glenn, he told him all about his cake and what a mess he'd made of it. "I've heard about it," said Ted. "News travels fast in Greendale. I think everybody knows about your cake." "The trouble is," said Pat, "I've spoilt the tin as well as the cake, and Mrs. Goggins doesn't sell cake tins." "Don't worry," said Ted. "I'll make you one. I've been wanting something to try my new welder on. Call in after you've finished your letters and it'll be ready for you." "Thanks, Ted. You're a marvel." When Pat called on Granny Dryden, she was putting the icing on a birthday cake for Katie and Tom Pottage. She had put the icing in a bag with a hole in the corner. She was squeezing the bag so that the icing came out and wrote itself on the cake. It made patterns and words. Pat watched her. "That's clever," said Pat. "I think I'll try that." Pat collected his new cake tin from Ted on his way home. It was rather a strange cake tin. It looked as though it had started life as something quite different, part of a car or a washing machine, perhaps. "It's not like the cake tins in the shops," said Ted. "None of this non-stick nonsense. But it'll do the job okay if you give it a good greasing." Pat looked at a tin of motor grease on a shelf. Ted laughed. "Not with that. You have to get some butter on a piece of grease-proof paper and rub it round the tin inside. It stops the cake from sticking to the tin. You'll never get it out if you don't do that." "There's a lot to learn about making cakes," said Pat. I never knew there was so much to it. Thanks, Ted. Cheerio. Pat had another try at making his cake that evening. He did all the things that his friends had told him. He set the alarm clock to tell him when the cake would be ready. Jess went off to the Pottages' barn hunting mice until it was all over. He thought it would be safer there. When Pat took the cake out of the oven, there was no smell of burning. There was a lovely smell of newly baked cake, just as there was when Sarah made one. It came out of the tin perfectly and it looked lovely. All Greendale was waiting the next day to hear about Pat's cake. The news was good, but it still had to be iced. And, as Dr. Gilbertson said, we won't know if it's a success until Sarah comes home. The next day, Pat started on the icing. The first batch of icing was too thin. When Pat put it on the cake, it slowly ran down the sides onto the table. The second batch was too thick. It wouldn't come out of the icing bag. The third batch was just right. Pat wrote, "Welcome home," in pink icing and left it to set. When Sarah and Julian came home, they were pleased to see a cake waiting for them. They all had a slice and it was delicious. "I didn't know you could make cakes," said Sarah. "What a lovely surprise. Did it take long?" "No," said Pat. "Only a few days." Sarah thought that sounded a long time, just for making one cake. But she was enjoying it so much that she didn't say so. The next day, Sarah found the remains of her cake tin in the dustbin. I think it was a good thing that Pat, at that moment, was at the far end of Greendale delivering letters. But he had a long story to tell when he came home.
Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. Early in the morning, just as day is dawning, he picks up all the post bags in his van. Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. All the birds are singing, and the day is just beginning. Pat feels he's a really happy man. Everybody knows his bright red van. All his friends will smile as he waves to greet them. Maybe you can never be sure there'll be knock, ring, letters through your door. Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. All the birds are singing, and the day is just beginning. Pat feels he's a really happy man. Everybody knows his bright red van. All his friends will smile as he waves to greet them. Maybe you can never be sure there'll be knock, ring, letters through your door. Letters through your door. Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. Early in the morning, just as day is dawning, he picks up all the post bags in his van. Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. All the birds are singing, and the day is just beginning. Pat feels he's a really happy man. Oh,